Okay, I just watched all 51 minutes of Donald Trump's speech where he announced he's running for president. And you would ask, why did I do that, some of you? I'll be very honest. I've always had an admiration for Donald Trump as a person whose undergraduate and master's degrees are in city planning from Texas and Berkeley, as a person whose hero coming out of high school was John Portman, the famous architect turned developer who created the Hyatt Regency design concept with the atriums. I've always had a soft spot for architects and builders and planners. And Donald Trump certainly is a builder and a planner. I also have always had a love for the finer things in life, and Donald Trump certainly represents that. I love 21. He has a common table at 21. I was honored with the opportunity to sit in Cap's Corner, which is actually right next to Fred Trump's place at 21. Fred Trump is Mr. Trump's father. Okay, but with all that, it does not mean I support Donald Trump as president, nor his politics. But because of what I explained to you, I felt compelled to listen to what he had to say. Donald Trump's speech reminded me of the speech that Bullworth gave when he was announcing his run for president. Now, Bullworth is a fictitious character played by Warren Beatty who said whatever came to him. He talked without notes or teleprompter and was insulting to blacks in particular, let alone people of color. Similarly, Donald Trump, and I took copious notes as I was listening to his speech as it was posted on YouTube, was racist, crude, insulting, demogagic, and egomaniacal. Now, the last part I don't mind because so am I. But the bottom line is, there was one part of his speech that made me cringe far more than anything else I heard, and it was his attack on Mexicans, people coming over the border, saying that they were undesirable, saying that Mexico sent us the worst of the bunch, and other rhetoric of that type. Which means you are very much inclined, if you think in that way, to pass someone who is Hispanic, Latino, and think they're from Mexico and treat them inappropriately because you've got Donald Trump flying around in your head, or the thoughts of anyone who thinks like Mr. Trump. And you're quite likely to do something that is antisocial and nasty toward that person in some kind of way, which makes you a lousy person. Donald Trump carries that negative thinking around when he makes statements like that and gives license to his fans to think that way or to treat someone that way. The bottom line is, and I can tell you from experience with a gentleman who was mayor of San Carlos Cedro, a town in Mexico, who had to leave the town in order to save his life and the life of his family and sought political asylum here. He was picked up by DEA agents of all people, of all types. Didn't necessarily need to be DEA because he wasn't high on anything. He wasn't a drug user at all. They picked him up. He wound up detained by the INS in San Francisco. To make a long story short, got political asylum and successfully got his family out of there. Why? Because rebels wanted to use his radio station to produce and communicate their own propaganda to the population of the town that he presided over. And if he didn't allow them the opportunity to do that, they were going to kill him and his family. It's stories like that that aren't told that result in someone fleeing over the border. It's not what you think. And you have to look at the stories of the people that come over. And yeah, generally because Mexico is a poor country, they're not going to have all the wealth that we have in the United States. This is an old story, we know that. But what bothers me about the focus on, quote, Mexicans, is you have Irish waitresses who come over here with similar stories. They get jobs, however, in places like Irish restaurants and bars, and they're able to live many times illegally without anyone calling them out because they don't look what? Latino. That's lost on Mr. Trump. He doesn't think that way because he presents an us versus them mentality that worked during the Ronald Reagan period of the 80s for a spell, but in the hyper-diverse, hyper-connected 21st century, of which this is 2015, that song played a long time ago and it's dead. It doesn't work. So what we're left with is a person in Donald Trump who comes off like a bigot in that way, but if you listen to his speech, has the right idea of what's wrong with our country from an economic perspective, okay? He's right about manufacturing. We need to bring it back. He is correct about the need to rebuild our middle class. But on the other hand, so is everybody else. Where he's incorrect, even there, and this is where his us versus them mentality gets him into trouble, is thinking that American companies are truly American anymore. Ford stopped being an American company a long time ago, like 20 years ago, and it became progressively less so. Boeing stopped being an American company decades ago. The 787 has parts that were manufactured in 96 different countries around the world. Many of us who are in the internet business are used to having at least a portion of our income coming from someone overseas. We're used to hiring someone from overseas and vice versa. That's the world we live in today. Will a tariff situation that he proposes work? It could. It could. But then again, here's where his thought process is incomplete. He talks about raising a tariff on Ford, and I expected him to say they're going to build I'm going to get them to build a manufacturing plant in the United States. He didn't say that, because that's where the jobs come in, right? He didn't say that. But that's what happens when you have a thought process that's based on us versus them, but not based truly on the mechanics of solving the problem he points to. Or take his comment regarding the trade bill that President Obama tried to get through. He said it was stupid. He said it was negotiated by stupid people, or words to that effect. But then he veers off, and instead of talking about how he would fix the trade bill or how he would have handled the situation differently, he talks about other politicians he thinks are stupid. He spends a lot of time calling people stupid or idiotic. And he spends so much of his time throwing these bombs out about people that it takes away from a constructive discussion about where the country is going and how he would fix it. And that's because he doesn't really understand, by his own words, the economic statistics he looks at. For example, he said that at one point there was zero or negative gross domestic product. That's wrong. We have never had zero gross domestic product going back to even when the country was born. What he meant to say was that we had a negative rate of growth in domestic product, gross domestic product, but we didn't have zero gross domestic product. He not only didn't catch himself saying that, he kept repeating that error in thought about 3 times. So he doesn't get what he's saying. So he needs to really go back, look at what he's saying, and ask himself, would I support me if I were running for president with a speech like that? I'd be very surprised if his answer was yes. He needs to take the racist rhetoric out of his tone, too. That needs to go.